You probably won't survive this story the way you think you will, because by the end, you'll realize that the monster you're about to meet could have been your college study partner, your co-worker, or the charming guy who helped you carry groceries to your car last Tuesday. You're standing at Lake Sammamish State Park on July 14, 1974, and the Pacific Northwest summer has delivered one of those perfect days that makes people move to Seattle despite the rain. The temperature hovers at a comfortable 75 degrees. Mount Rainier looms majestically in the distance, and 40,000 people have descended on this slice of paradise to soak up vitamin D before the inevitable return of gray skies. Beach volleyball nets stretch across the sand. The scent of barbecue mingles with sunscreen, and somewhere in this sea of humanity, a predator is methodically selecting his next victim. You notice him first, not because he looks dangerous, quite the opposite. Theodore Robert Bundy moves through the crowd with the fluid confidence of someone who has never questioned his right to be anywhere he chooses to be. At 27, he possesses what criminal psychologists will later describe as superficial charm taken to its most lethal extreme. His brown hair falls in perfect waves across his forehead, his smile reveals straight white teeth that suggests good genetics and better dental care, and his eyes hold that peculiar combination of intelligence and warmth that makes strangers want to trust him with their secrets. He's wearing a crisp white tennis outfit that screams country club respectability, and there's a sling supporting his left arm injury that immediately triggers the helping instinct in anyone who notices. But you're watching more carefully than most, and you catch something others miss: the way his eyes constantly scan the crowd, cataloging and dismissing potential targets with the cold efficiency of a shark identifying wounded fish. The hunting ground he's chosen couldn't be more public or more perfect. Lake Sammamish State Park sits on the southeastern shore of Lake Sammamish, a popular recreation area where Seattle's young professionals come to see and be seen. The beach attracts exactly the demographic Bundy prefers: college-aged women with long, straight hair parted in the middle, a look that, investigators will later discover, bears an unsettling resemblance to his ex-girlfriend Elizabeth Klopfer, though you don't know that yet. You watch him pause near a group of young women playing frisbee, his head tilted slightly as if he's listening to music only he can hear. Then he moves on, past a family with small children, past a group of middle-aged men throwing horseshoes, until his attention locks onto a solitary figure reading a book in the shade of a large maple tree. Janice Ann OTT, 23 years old, works as a probation caseworker at the King County Juvenile Court. She has the kind of quiet intelligence that shows in the way she holds herself, shoulders back, chin up, completely absorbed in whatever she's reading. Her long brown hair catches the filtered sunlight, and she is wearing the uniform of the era: cut-off jeans and a halter top that suggests confidence without vanity. She has no idea that she's just become the focal point of a predator's attention. Bundy's approach is masterful in its simplicity. He limps slightly as he walks toward her, favoring his injured arm just enough to suggest genuine discomfort without seeming to milk it for sympathy. When he speaks, his voice carries that perfect blend of confidence and vulnerability that disarms even the most cautious individuals. "Excuse me," he says, offering that $1,000,000 smile. "I'm really sorry to bother you, but I wonder if you could help me for just a minute. I'm supposed to load my sailboat onto my car, but with this stupid arm." He gestures toward his sling with the kind of rueful embarrassment that suggests he is not used to needing help from anyone. You're close enough to observe Janice's reaction, and it's exactly what Bundy is counting on. Her face immediately softens with concern, and you can practically see her mental calculus. Here's a clean-cut, well-spoken man who's clearly educated and obviously in genuine need of assistance, the kind of person her middle-class upbringing taught her to help without question, the kind of person who couldn't possibly represent any danger. "Oh, of course," she says, closing her book and rising gracefully to her feet. "I'd be happy to help. Where's your car?" And there it is, the moment when a normal Saturday afternoon transforms into something unspeakable. Bundy's smile deepens, and for just an instant, you catch something flickering behind his eyes that makes your skin crawl. It's not quite satisfaction, not quite hunger, but something that combines elements of both with a cold calculation that feels fundamentally inhuman. As you follow at a discreet distance, you realize you're witnessing something that will revolutionize criminal investigation techniques. What Bundy is doing, luring victims from crowded public spaces using fabricated vulnerabilities and social engineering, represents a completely new paradigm in predatory behavior. Most criminals of this era are opportunistic and disorganized, striking when circumstances align. But Bundy operates more like a military strategist, creating opportunities through careful planning and psychological manipulation. The walk to the parking area takes approximately 3 minutes. 3 minutes during which Janice OTT makes pleasant conversation with her soon-to-be killer, asking about his injury, commenting on the beautiful weather, probably thinking this brief good deed will make for a nice story to share with friends later. She has no way of knowing that there is no sailboat, just as she has no way of knowing that the charming stranger beside her has already perfected this routine through previous encounters. They disappear into the maze of cars, and you feel a sick certainty that you'll never see Janice OTT alive again. What you don't expect is that Bundy will return to the same hunting ground just 4 hours later. When he reappears, the sling is gone. Apparently his arm has made a miraculous recovery. This time, he's set his sights on Denise Marie Naslund, 19 years old, a computer programmer who's spending the day with friends near the picnic area. She has the same general look as Janice. Long dark hair, slender build, the kind of wholesome attractiveness that photographs well in yearbooks and family portraits. You watch in horrified fascination as Bundy deploys the same basic script with subtle variations. He introduces himself as Ted, detail that will later astound investigators, as most criminals go to great lengths to avoid being identified. But Bundy seems to relish the risk, feeding off the adrenaline of operating in plain sight of potential witnesses. This time, the sailboat story evolves. He mentions having trouble at the marina, needing help carrying something to his car, asking if she might spare just a few minutes to assist someone in obvious distress. The performance is so polished, so genuinely convincing, that you find yourself almost believing it despite knowing better. Denise looks back at her friends, promises she returns shortly, and walks away with the stranger who's been so apologetic about interrupting her afternoon. Her friends barely glance up from their card game. Why would they? She's just helping someone load a boat. She'll be back in 10 minutes with a story about the nice guy she met and how good it feels to help others, except she won't be back. Historians still debate whether Bundy's boldness at Lake Sammamish represented supreme confidence or reckless overreach, but watching him operate, you understand that the question misses the point. This isn't about confidence or recklessness, it's about a fundamental difference in how he processes risk versus reward. Where normal people see the danger of operating in broad daylight surrounded by thousands of potential witnesses, Bundy sees the ultimate test of his abilities. The peculiar detail that would later fascinate criminal psychologists was Bundy's decision to use his real first name. In an era before widespread background checks and instant information sharing, false identities were relatively easy to maintain. But Bundy seemed compelled to leave breadcrumbs, as if part of him wanted to be caught, or more accurately, wanted to prove he was too clever to be caught even when taking unnecessary risks. As the afternoon wears on, you notice other women who fit the profile. A blonde with a tennis racket who walks past Bundy without making eye contact. A brunette reading near the water who packs up and leaves when he approaches. These near misses represent the randomness that separates the living from the dead. Split-second decisions and chance encounters that determine who goes home for dinner and who becomes a statistic. The sun begins its descent toward the western mountains, painting Lake Sammamish in shades of gold and crimson. Families start packing up their picnic supplies. Teenagers reluctantly abandon their volleyball games, and couples stroll hand in hand along the water's edge, completely unaware that they've spent the day sharing space with one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. You linger as the crowd thins, watching the last stragglers load their cars and head back to their ordinary lives. The normalcy feels surreal now. Children chase frisbees across the same beach where a monster selected his prey. Couples hold hands along the same paths where two women walked willingly toward their deaths. What haunts you most is the violence you did unsee, the complete absence of violence you did see. No screaming, no struggle, no obvious signs of distress. Just polite conversation and helpful strangers walking calmly toward parked cars. Evil, you realize, doesn't always announce itself with dramatic music and ominous lighting. Sometimes it wears tennis whites and asks for help with a smile. As darkness settles over the Pacific Northwest, you understand that July 14, 1974, will become a watershed moment in American criminal history. Not because it was Bundy's first killing, it wasn't, but because it represented his transition from careful opportunist to brazen showman. The friendly stranger with the injured arm has just demonstrated that the most dangerous predators don't lurk in dark alleys or abandoned buildings. They thrive in the bright sunshine of ordinary life, hiding behind good manners and superficial charm. But Lake Sammamish is just one hunting ground in what will prove to be a multi-state killing spree of unprecedented scope and brutality. The man you've watched work this crowd with such calculated precision has already been refining his techniques for years, and he's nowhere near finished. The most terrifying realization is what Ted Bundy accomplished that sunny Saturday afternoon, as how effortlessly he accomplished it, and how many times he would do it again. You're following a ghost now, a killer who exists in multiple states simultaneously, always one step ahead of investigators who are still trying to understand that they're re-hunting the same man. It's 1974, and law enforcement agencies operate in isolation, sharing information through carbon-copied reports that take weeks to reach their destinations. By the time police in Washington compare notes with detectives in Utah, Ted Bundy has already crossed 3 state lines and added new victims to his growing collection. You watch him perfect his craft across the American West like a traveling salesman hawking death. His mobile office is a tan 1968 Volkswagen Beetle, a car so perfectly ordinary, so utterly forgettable, that witnesses struggled to describe it even minutes after seeing it. The Beetle becomes more than transportation. It's camouflage that transforms him from suspect to scenery, who suspects the friendly college student puttering along in his economy car. But you see what others miss. How Bundy has modified his innocent-looking vehicle into a predator-esque toolkit. The passenger seat can be quickly removed, creating space for unconscious victims. A crowbar lies hidden beneath the driver's seat, ready to be deployed as both weapon and tool. Most ingeniously, he has installed a mechanism that allows him to release the passenger door handle from the outside, trapping anyone who climbs into his car in a mobile prison. You're in Utah now, watching him work the campus of the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. It's October 1974, and Bundy has enrolled as a law student to cover identity so perfect it's almost artistic. What better disguise for a killer than someone studying the very system designed to catch him? He attends classes during the day, discussing constitutional protections and criminal procedures with professors who have no idea they're reteaching a masterclass to someone, actively circumventing every principle they hold sacred. The campus provides ideal hunting grounds, young women walking alone at night, poorly lit pathways between dormitories, a social environment where strangers can approach students without raising suspicion. You watch him spend hours studying the patterns which routes women take to the library, what time the various buildings empty out, where security guards make their rounds. On October 2nd, you observe him approach Nancy Wilcox, an 18-year-old cheerleader from Holiday, Utah. The script has evolved since Lake Sammamish, becoming more sophisticated and harder to detect. This time, there's no fake injury or sailboat story. Instead, Bundy poses as a police officer, complete with a badge he's stolen from a real cop. The authority figure gambit proves even more effective than feigned. Vulnerability who questions a police officer requesting assistance with an investigation. You're close enough to hear his pitch. There's been a break-in at her car. He needs her to come identify what might be missing. It'll just take a minute. Nancy hesitates, some survival instinct triggering a warning she can't quite articulate, but the badge looks real. His manner is professional, and questioning police authority in 1974 requires a level of skepticism most young women haven't yet developed. She agrees to accompany him to the parking area, and you follow at a distance that allows observation without detection. What you witness next will become Bundy's signature technique, the swift, brutal application of a crowbar to the skull, followed by the mechanical efficiency of body disposal. No passion, no rage, just the cold professionalism of someone who has reduced murder to a series of reproducible steps. The peculiar detail that distinguishes Bundy from other killers of his era is the sheer geographic scope of his operations. While most serial offenders stick to familiar territory, Bundy treats the entire American West as his personal hunting preserve. You track him from Utah to Colorado, watching him adapt his methods to new environments with the flexibility of a seasoned traveler. In Aspen, Colorado, he poses as a ski instructor to approach women at popular mountain resorts. The seasonal workforce provides perfect cover temporary employees, who appear for a few months and disappear without raising questions. You watch him charm his way into the confidence of women who come to the mountains seeking adventure, not knowing they've encountered an adventure that will end in death. Historians still debate whether Bundy's nomadic killing spree was planned strategy or simply opportunistic wandering. But observing his patterns, you recognize the methodical intelligence behind his movements. He never stays in one location long enough for law enforcement to establish patterns. By the time police realize they have a serial killer, he's already operating 500 miles away under a completely different identity. The Volkswagen Beetle serves as more than just transportation, it as a mobile crime scene that crosses state lines before forensic teams even know a crime has occurred. You watch him modify the interior repeatedly, learning from each encounter and refining his approach. After Nancy Wilcox, he installs carpeting in the trunk area to muffle sounds and absorb blood. Following his encounter with Melissa Smith in Utah, he adds tie-down points for restraints. Each modification represents a lesson learned from previous kills, transforming the innocent beetle into a rolling torture chamber that could pass any routine traffic stop. The genius lies in the contradiction. The car that screams harmless college student concealing machinery designed for kidnapping and murder. You're in Colorado Springs now, watching Bundy operate near the Broadmoor Hotel, one of the most exclusive resorts in the American West. It's January 1975, and he's hunting Karen Campbell, a 23-year-old nurse from Michigan who's vacationing with her and his children. The hotel's setting presents unique challenges: security cameras, well-trained staff, guests who pay attention to their surroundings. But Bundy has evolved beyond simple abduction techniques. Now he is mastering the art of what criminologists will later term blitz attacks, overwhelming victims so quickly they have no opportunity to resist or call for help. You watch him wait in the hotel corridor between the elevator and the restaurant, timing his move to coincide with Karen's brief walk to retrieve a magazine from her room. The attack happens in seconds. A quick blow to disable her, a fireman's carry to the stairwell, and then down to the parking garage where the beetle waits with its engine running. Hotel security cameras from 1975 are primitive by later standards, capturing blurry images that could be anyone carrying anything. By the time staff realizes a guest is missing, Bundy is already driving through the Colorado mountains with another victim unconscious in his mobile chamber. What makes this period particularly chilling is watching Bundy's confidence grow with each successful kill. The nervous energy you observed at Lake Sammamish has been replaced by the cool professionalism of someone who has found his calling. He no longer relies solely on charm and manipulation. Now he combines psychological techniques with physical violence, creating a hybrid approach that proves devastatingly effective. You follow him to Vail, Colorado, where he's taken a job at a ski resort under the name Chris Hagen. The fake identity is supported by forged documents so sophisticated they fool background check systems that won't be upgraded for another decade. He rents a small apartment, establishes local bank accounts, even joins a hiking club where he meets potential victims in settings that seem completely safe. The hiking club connection proves particularly insidious. You watch him spend months building relationships with outdoor enthusiasts, gaining their trust through shared adventures and apparent expertise in mountain survival. When Julie Cunningham, a 26-year-old ski instructor, agrees to go snowshoeing with him in March 1975, she is not accepting an invitation from a stranger. She is joining someone her hiking club has already vouched for. The mountain wilderness provides the perfect disposal site for bodies, and Bundy has learned to read the terrain like a topographical map of opportunity. Remote areas accessible by four-wheel drive where remains might not be discovered for months or years. Creek beds where spring floods will scatter evidence across miles of wilderness. Rock formations that provide natural concealment while still allowing relatively easy access for burial. But the most terrifying aspect of this phase is Bundy's growing expertise, his complete emotional detachment from what he is doing. You watch him return from killing expeditions and attend law school classes without any apparent psychological toll. He takes notes on criminal procedure, participates in study groups, even dates other law students who find him charming and intellectually stimulating. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. The same hands that took lecture notes on constitutional protections against unreasonable search and seizure have also strangled the life from multiple women. The same mind that analyzes case law by day spends evenings planning increasingly sophisticated abduction techniques. You realize you're witnessing something unprecedented in criminal history, not just a serial killer, but a serial killer with the intelligence and education to study the very system trying to catch him. Bundy isn't just evading law enforcement, he's using his legal education to stay several moves ahead of investigators, who are still playing by rules he has already learned to circumvent. As winter turns to spring in the Colorado Rockies, you understand that the man behind the wheel of the tan Volkswagen Beetle has transformed from opportunistic killer to something far more dangerous. A criminal mastermind who combines the predatory instincts of a psychopath with the analytical skills of a law student and the geographic mobility of modern American society. The most chilling realization is that he's still just getting started. You're sitting in a Colorado courthouse on June 7, 1977, watching what appears to be a routine hearing for a man charged with attempted kidnapping. But this is routine at OURE, about to witness one of the most audacious escape attempts in American criminal history, executed by someone who's been studying courtroom procedures, not as a defendant but as a law student who understands every weakness in the system. Ted Bundy sits at the defendant's table wearing a brown suit that makes him look more like a young attorney than a suspected serial killer. He's representing himself, which means he has access to the law library, unrestricted meetings with investigators, and the kind of freedom of movement that most defendants can only dream of. The Pitkin County Courthouse operates under the quaint assumption that educated, well-dressed defendants pose minimal flight risk, an assumption Bundy is about to shatter in spectacular fashion. You watch him spend the morning recess studying the courthouse layout with the methodical attention of an architect reviewing blueprints. Second floor law library, third floor courtroom, ground floor exit that leads directly to the street. No metal detectors, no security cameras. Guards who are more accustomed to dealing with drunk and disorderly cases than alleged serial killers. The courthouse embodies small-town Colorado trusts, the kind of faith in human nature that Bundy has built his entire criminal career around exploiting. During the lunch break, you follow him to the law library where he's ostensibly researching precedents for his defense. But instead of opening law books, he moves to a window that faces the courthouse annex. The window is old, the kind installed when the building was constructed in the 1950s. With a simple latch mechanism that was never designed to contain anyone determined to leave. What happens next unfolds with the smooth precision of a magic trick. Bundy opens the window, removes his suit jacket to avoid snagging it on the frame, and drops approximately 15 feet to the roof of the courthouse annex. No hesitation, no looking back, no dramatic pause for effect. One moment he's a defendant researching his case. The next moment he's a fugitive jogging across downtown Aspen in his shirt sleeves. The escape isn't discovered for nearly an hour. When guards finally check the law library and find it empty, they assume Bundy has simply returned to his cell early. It's only when they go to retrieve him for the afternoon session that they realize their star. Defendant has literally flown the coop. Then, Bundy has changed clothes, stolen a car, and disappeared into the Colorado wilderness with a kind of head start that makes manhunts nearly impossible. You're tracking him now through the rugged terrain around Aspen, watching a law student transform into a mountain man with surprising effectiveness. Bundy has always been physically capable. He's an accomplished swimmer, experienced hiker, and skilled enough at outdoor survival to work at ski resorts. But you're seeing something new, a fugitive who understands that successful escape requires more than just running fast and hiding well. For 6 days, you observe him moving through the wilderness like a ghost who's studied every survival manual ever written. He avoids hiking trails where search teams might spot him, instead following game paths and creek beds that provide natural concealment. During daylight hours, he hides in areas where helicopter searches would be ineffective: thick forest canopy, rocky overhangs, abandoned mining structures that dot the Colorado mountains. But Bundy makes a critical error that reveals the limits of his wilderness skills. He attempts to steal supplies from a remote cabin and triggers a security system he did not know existed. The silent alarm brings sheriff's deputies within minutes, and his brief taste of freedom ends with him face down in the dirt, handcuffed and heading back to a jail cell that will be significantly more secure than his previous accommodations. The peculiar detail that fascinates investigators isn't that Bundy escaped. Plenty of criminals have jumped from courthouse windows. It's that he planned and executed the escape while simultaneously conducting his own legal defense, demonstrating a compartmentalized intelligence that operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Most fugitives are running on pure adrenaline and desperation. Bundy was running on carefully calculated strategy informed by months of legal research. Historians still debate whether the Aspen escape was impulsive opportunism or long-term planning. But watching Bundy's behavior in the weeks leading up to June 7th, you recognize the hallmarks of meticulous preparation. He's been testing security procedures, noting guard schedules, even exercising in his cell to build the upper body strength necessary for the window drop. You're in the Garfield County Jail now, watching Bundy adapt to his new maximum security environment with the same methodical intelligence he has applied to every other challenge. The guards have learned from Pitkin County's embarrassment. Bundy is now confined to a cell that has been stripped of anything that could be used as an escape tool, and his movements are monitored constantly. But you're also watching something else develop: Bundy's growing celebrity status. The courthouse escape has transformed him from regional murder suspect to national news story, and he's beginning to receive fan mail from women who find his combination of intelligence, charm, and danger irresistibly attractive. The letters arrive daily, some containing marriage proposals, others offering assistance with his legal defense. This attention feeds something dark in Bundy's psychology. You observe him spending hours crafting responses to his admirers, developing a public persona that combines legal expertise with roguish charm. He's becoming more than a serial killer. He's evolving into a brand, complete with devoted followers who see him as a romantic antihero rather than a predatory monster. The jail environment also allows you to observe Bundy's relationship with other inmates, and what you see is deeply unsettling. Rather than being intimidated by hardened criminals, he quickly establishes himself as the intellectual alpha of the cell block. Other prisoners seek his advice on legal matters, and he dispenses guidance with the patronizing superiority of someone who considers himself fundamentally different from common criminals. But Bundy is planning something far more ambitious than his previous escape attempt. You watch him spend months studying the jail's construction, learning the schedules of different shifts, identifying the weakest points in security protocols that have been upgraded since his Aspen adventure. This time, he is not looking for a dramatic window exit. He is planning something that will give him weeks or months of freedom rather than days. December 30th, 1977, arrives with a kind of bitter cold that makes Colorado winters legendary. You're watching the Garfield County Jail during the evening shift change, when attention to detail is typically lowest and guards are focused on getting through their routines and heading home to New Year's celebrations. Bundy has spent months losing weight, dropping from his normal 175 pounds to approximately 140, a deliberate starvation diet designed to make him small enough to fit through spaces that would normally be impossible to navigate. He's been studying the jail's heating system, learning that the old building has crawl spaces and utility shafts that were never designed to contain determined escapees. What you witness next represents the culmination of months of planning combined with split-second timing. During the guard shift change, when attention is divided and protocols are momentarily relaxed, Bundy removes ceiling tiles in his cell and disappears into the building's infrastructure like a human snake, navigating through spaces barely wide enough for a child. The escape route he's chosen is diabolically clever, through the ceiling of his cell across the jail's attic space down into the apartment of the chief jailer, who lives upstairs, and out through the front door, while the man who is supposed to be guarding him sleeps peacefully one floor below. By the time guards discover his empty cell the next morning, Bundy has been gone for 8 hours and could be anywhere in a radius of several hundred miles. But this time, he's not heading for the wilderness. You're following him now as he makes his way to Denver, then catches flights to Chicago and eventually Florida, using identification documents he's somehow acquired during his months in jail. The logistics are staggering: false IDs, airline tickets, cash reserves, even changes of clothing that transform him from escaped prisoner to traveling businessman. You realize you're watching something unprecedented, a serial killer who's become a master escape artist, combining the predatory instincts of a psychopath with the strategic thinking of a military planner and the performance skills of a stage magician. Each escape has been more sophisticated than the last, suggesting a criminal mind that learns and adapts at an accelerating pace. As Bundy's plane touches down in Florida, you understand that his escape from Colorado represents more than just another fugitive story. It's the moment when Ted Bundy transitions from regional killer to national nightmare, bringing his refined techniques and hard-earned expertise to a new hunting ground that has no idea what's coming. The most terrifying realization is that he escaped again. That he used his time in custody to become an even more dangerous predator than the one who was originally captured. Prison was supposed to contain him, but instead it became graduate school for a killer who was already operating at genius level. You're standing outside the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University on January 15, 1978, watching the final hours of what appears to be an ordinary Saturday night in Tallahassee. Students are returning from parties, couples say goodnight on front porches, and the warm Florida air carries the sounds of late-night laughter and music. None of the young women heading upstairs to their beds have any idea that Ted Bundy has been in Florida for 2 weeks, studying their routines with the methodical attention of a military strategist planning an assault. You've been tracking him since his arrival in Tallahassee, watching him transform from escaped fugitive to predatory ghost haunting the Florida State campus. He's stolen a white Dodge van, acquired fake identification under the name Chris Hagen, and rented a shabby room at a boarding house near campus that provides the perfect cover for someone who wants to observe college life without attracting attention. But something is different about Bundy now. The calculated charm you observed in his earlier crimes has been replaced by a barely controlled rage that simmers just beneath his surface composure. The months in jail, the constant surveillance, the humiliation of being captured twice, all of it has coalesced into a fury that makes him exponentially more dangerous than the methodical killer who once lured women into his Volkswagen Beetle with fake injuries and polite requests for help. You watch him case the Chi Omega house for days, learning which windows can be opened from outside, which doors have faulty locks, what time the house quiets down after weekend parties. The sorority house represents everything Bundy has come to despise about the world that rejected him. Privileged young women who embody the kind of life he believes should have been his by right. The building itself is a study in 1970s campus security, which is to say, virtually non-existent. The Chi Omega House operates under the same assumptions as most college residences of the era, that the biggest threats are noise complaints and underage drinking, not predators who've spent months planning systematic attacks. Door locks are old and easily bypassed. Windows lack security measures. And the house mother, who is supposed to provide oversight, lives in a separate apartment where she hear disturbances in the main building. You repositioned across the street at 2:45 a.m. on January 15th, when Bundy makes his final approach to the house. He's carrying what appears to be a small gym bag, and he moves with the confidence of someone who has rehearsed every step of what is about to unfold. The rear door of the Chi Omega house has a lock that can be opened with a credit card, a security flaw he discovered during his reconnaissance that transforms the sorority house from fortress to open invitation. What happens next unfolds with a speed and brutality that's shocking even by Bundy's standards. You watch him enter through the rear door and disappear into the darkened interior of the house, where 36 young women are sleeping peacefully in their beds, completely unaware that their sanctuary has been invaded by one of America's most prolific serial killers. The attack begins in room 8, where Lisa Levy, a 20-year-old fashion merchandising major from St. Petersburg, is asleep after a night out with friends. Bundy has brought a oak log as his weapon of choice, crude compared to his previous methods, but devastatingly effective when applied with a kind of rage that's been building inside him for months. The blunt force trauma is so severe that it fractures Lisa's skull and causes brain damage that would have been fatal even with immediate medical intervention. But Bundy isn't finished. You realize with growing horror that he is not just killing, he is acting out some twisted fantasy that combines sexual violence with murderous rage in ways that represent a significant escalation from his previous crimes. The bite marks he leaves on Lisa Levy's body will later become crucial evidence, but in this moment they represent something even more disturbing. A killer who is no longer satisfied with simple murder. Room 4 becomes his next target, where Margaret Bowman, a 21-year-old art history major from St. Petersburg, becomes the second victim of what's rapidly becoming a massacre. The nylon stocking used to strangle her suggests premeditation. Bundy has brought tools specifically designed for killing, transforming what might have appeared to be impulsive violence into something far more calculated and terrifying. The peculiar detail that will later puzzle investigators is the sheer speed of the attacks. Bundy moves through the Chi Omega house like a tornado of violence, striking multiple victims in different rooms within a span of approximately 15 minutes. This is the methodical stalking you observed in his earlier crimes. It's a blitz attack that maximizes casualties while minimizing the risk of discovery. You watch him move to room 9, where Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner are awakened by sounds they can't quite identify. The attack on these two women demonstrates another evolution in Bundy's methodology. He has learned to incapacitate victims quickly enough to prevent screams that might alert other residents. The blunt force trauma he inflicts is precisely calculated to cause unconsciousness without immediate death, allowing him to complete his assault without triggering a house-wide alarm. Both women survive, though their injuries are severe enough to require extensive reconstructive surgery. Karen Chandler suffers a broken jaw, crushed teeth, and facial lacerations that will leave permanent scars. Kathy Kleiner's injuries include a broken jaw and severe facial trauma that requires multiple surgical procedures, but their survival provides something invaluable, eyewitness testimony that will help investigators understand they are dealing with an attacker who operates with surgical precision even in the midst of apparent frenzy. The entire assault on the Chi Omega house lasts less than 30 minutes from entry to exit. By 3:15 a.m., Bundy has disappeared back into the Tallahassee night, leaving behind a crime scene so brutal and chaotic that responding officers initially assumed they're dealing with multiple attackers. The idea that one person could inflict this level of damage in such a short time frame challenges every assumption law enforcement has about how serial killers operate. But Bundy's night of violence isn't over. You follow him as he walks 8 blocks to another sorority house, where Cheryl Thomas, a 21-year-old dance major, is sleeping alone in her apartment. The attack here is different, more personal, more focused, suggesting that Bundy has moved beyond indiscriminate rage into something that resembles ritualistic behavior. Cheryl Thomas survives, but barely. The skull fractures and permanent hearing loss she suffers represent the kind of injuries typically associated with car accidents or construction site mishaps, not criminal assaults. The fact that she lives through the attack is largely due to chance neighbors who hear suspicious sounds and call police arrive just minutes after Bundy flees the scene. Historians still debate whether the Chi Omega attacks represent Bundy at his most dangerous or simply most desperate. But watching the aftermath, you understand that the distinction doesn't matter. What matters is that a killer who had previously operated with careful planning and methodical execution has demonstrated he is equally capable of spontaneous violence on a massive scale. The forensic evidence left behind at both crime scenes represents a significant departure from Bundy's previous methodology. The bite marks on Lisa Levia's body provide a direct link between attacker and victim that no amount of charm or legal maneuvering can explain away. For the first time in his criminal career, Bundy has left behind evidence that doesn't depend on eyewitness testimony or circumstantial connections. You realize you're witnessing the moment when Ted Bundy's criminal career begins its final phase. The careful predator who once lured victims with fake injuries and polite conversation has been replaced by something far more primitive and infinitely more dangerous. The law student who studied criminal procedures to avoid prosecution has become so consumed by rage that he has started making the kind of mistakes that lead directly to death row. As dawn breaks over Tallahassee on January 15, 1978, you understand that the night's violence represents both an ending and a beginning. An ending to the methodical killer who operated across multiple states for years without leaving conclusive evidence, and a beginning to the final act of a criminal career that will culminate in one of the most famous trials in American legal history. The most chilling realization is that Bundy's escalation to mass violence doesn't represent a loss of control. It represents the evolution of someone who has discovered that inflicting maximum terror provides the same satisfaction he once derived from elaborate psychological manipulation. He's not becoming less dangerous as he becomes more desperate. He's becoming more dangerous because desperation has freed him from the constraints of careful planning. You're following Ted Bundy through the streets of Lake City, Florida, on February 9, 1978, watching a predator who's been transformed by his recent crimes into something even more dangerous than before. The Chi Omega attacks occurred just 3 weeks ago, and rather than lying low or fleeing the state, Bundy has remained in Florida like a shark that has tasted blood and could unresist returning to familiar hunting waters. But this time, his target represents a horrifying escalation that will shock even investigators who thought they understood the depths of his depravity. You observe him driving a stolen white Dodge van through the quiet residential neighborhoods of Lake City, a small town in northern Florida where the biggest crime stories typically involve high school vandalism or domestic disputes. The van itself has become his new mobile hunting ground, larger than the Volkswagen Beetle, with tinted windows that provide concealment and rear doors that can be opened quickly for victim acquisition. Lake City represents a calculated choice of hunting ground. The town is small enough that strangers are noticed but large enough to provide potential victims. Isolated enough to delay law enforcement response but connected enough to major highways for quick escape. Most importantly, it's populated by the kind of trusting, small-town families who still allow their children to walk to school alone and play in neighborhoods where everyone knows everyone else. You watch Bundy position himself near Lake City Junior High School at dismissal time, studying the patterns of students who walk home rather than taking buses. He's looking for something specific, a victim who combines vulnerability with opportunity. Someone whose disappearance might not be immediately noticed but whose capture can be accomplished without witnesses. His attention locks onto Kimberly Diane Leach, a 12-year-old 7th grader who embodies everything innocent about small-town American childhood. Kim is popular at school, earns good grades, and has the kind of trusting nature that makes her help classmates with homework and volunteer for school projects. She's wearing her favorite outfit: jeans, a football jersey, and sneakers that suggest a girl more interested in playing outside than worrying about fashion. The approach Bundy uses represents another revolution in his methodology. Gone are the elaborate deceptions about sailboats or fake police badges. Instead, he simply pulls up beside Kim as she walks to retrieve something from her school locker and asks if she needs a ride. The van provides perfect cover from a distance. It looks like any parent picking up their child, and Kim's trusting response suggests she initially believes that's exactly what's happening. You watch in horror as she approaches the van willingly, probably thinking she's about to receive a ride from someone's helpful father or older brother. The abduction happens so quickly that even if witnesses had been present, they might have assumed they were watching a normal interaction between a child and a family member. One moment Kim is walking across the school parking lot. The next moment she is inside the van and Bundy is driving away with the calm efficiency of someone completing a routine errand. But this kidnapping represents something fundamentally different from Bundy's previous crimes. Kim Leach is a college-aged woman who fits his usual victim profile. She is a child whose disappearance will trigger an immediate and massive law enforcement response. You realize you were rewatching Bundy cross a line that even experienced investigators didn't think he would cross, moving from serial killer to child predator in a transition that reveals new depths to his psychological pathology. The peculiar detail that will later fascinate criminal psychologists is Bundy's choice to remain in Florida and target a child despite being one of the most wanted fugitives in America. Most criminals in his situation would be focused entirely on escape and survival, but Bundy seems compelled to continue killing even when doing so exponentially increases his risk of capture, suggesting a psychological compulsion that has moved beyond rational decision-making into pure predatory instinct. You follow the van as Bundy drives Kim to a remote area near the Suwannee River, approximately 35 miles from Lake City. The location he has chosen provides the kind of isolation that his previous urban crimes could use and offer: miles of swampland and forest where screams woe aren't be heard and bodies might never be discovered. But you're also observing something new in Bundy's behavior, a kind of frantic energy that suggests he is operating under extreme psychological pressure. The assault on Kim Leach unfolds with a brutality that exceeds even the Chi Omega attacks. You realize you're re-witnessing Bundy at his most dangerous, a killer who has abandoned all pretense of sophistication and given himself over entirely to the violent impulses that have been driving him for years. The methodical predator who once studied his victims for weeks before striking has been replaced by something that operates on pure predatory instinct. Kim's murder represents the culmination of everything. Bundy has learned about inflicting maximum suffering while minimizing his risk of discovery. But it also represents a critical error in judgment that will ultimately lead to his capture and execution. Unlike his college-aged victims, Kim's disappearance triggers an immediate Amber Alert-style response that floods northern Florida with law enforcement officers trained in child abduction cases. You are rewatching from a distance when Bundy abandons Kim's body in an abandoned hogshed approximately 35 miles west of Lake City. The location suggests he's familiar with the area's geography, possibly from previous scouting expeditions, but the forensic evidence he leaves behind demonstrates that he is no longer operating with his previous level of careful planning. Tire tracks, footprints, and fiber evidence create a trail that experienced investigators can follow back to its source. The manhunt that follows Kim Leach's disappearance represents the largest law enforcement mobilization in Florida history up to that point. You watch hundreds of officers from multiple agencies coordinate search efforts using helicopters, bloodhounds, and volunteer searchers who comb through thousands of acres of swampland and forest. The media coverage is immediate and intensive, with Kim's photograph appearing on television screens and newspaper front pages across the nation. But Bundy's biggest mistake is the evidence he has left behind. It's his decision to remain in the area rather than fleeing immediately after the murder. You observe him driving aimlessly through northern Florida, apparently unable to decide whether to run or continue hunting, paralyzed by the same psychological compulsion that drove him to kill Kim in the first place. On February 15, 1978, you were watching from across the street when Pensacola police officer David Lee conducts what appears to be a routine traffic stop on a stolen orange Volkswagen Beetle. The irony is almost too perfect. Bundy, who spent years killing women while driving various Beetles, is finally captured while behind the wheel of yet another stolen Volkswagen. The arrest itself is anticlimactic compared to the dramatic escapes and cross-country manhunts that defined Bundy's criminal career. Officer Lee approaches the car expecting to deal with a routine auto theft, not knowing he's about to apprehend one of the most wanted fugitives in American history. When Bundy initially provides false identification, Lee's suspicions are aroused more by his nervous behavior than by any dramatic revelation. Historians still debate whether Bundy's capture in Pensacola was an inevitable result of his escalating recklessness or simply bad luck that could have been avoided with better planning. But watching the arrest unfold, you understand that the distinction doesn't matter. What matters is that Ted Bundy's 7-year killing spree has finally ended, not with a dramatic shootout or daring escape, but with a routine traffic stop conducted by a sharp-eyed police officer who noticed something didn't quite add up. You realize you've just witnessed the end of one of the most prolific serial killing careers in American history. The charming law student who once lured victims with fake injuries and polite requests for help has been reduced to a desperate fugitive driving stolen cars and making the kind of basic mistakes that lead directly to capture. But Kim Leach's murder represents more than just Bundy. As final crime, it represents the moment when his psychological pathology reached a point where continued killing became more important than survival. The Redditor who once operated with careful planning and methodical execution had become so consumed by his compulsions that he was willing to risk everything for one more victim. As Bundy sits in the back of Officer Lee's patrol car, you understand that his arrest marks the beginning of the final act in a criminal career that will culminate in one of the most famous trials in American legal history. The man who once studied criminal law to evade prosecution will now face a legal system that has evolved specifically to handle predators like him. The most chilling realization is that Kim Leach's murder wasn't an aberration. It was the logical endpoint of a psychological trajectory that had been building for years. Bundy didn't suddenly become a child killer. He revealed himself to be someone capable of targeting any victim who satisfied his need for control and domination. We were sitting in Florida State Prison on January 23, 1989, watching Ted Bundy pace his death row cell like a caged predator who has finally run out of legal maneuvers. For over a decade, he has used his law school training and charismatic personality to navigate the appeals process with the same methodical intelligence he once applied to stalking victims. But now, with his execution scheduled for the following morning, even Bundy's legendary ability to manipulate the system has reached its limits. The transformation is striking. The confident law student who once charmed judges and juries has been replaced by a desperate man who is finally confronting the reality that his intellectual games can't postpone death indefinitely. His hair has thinned, his face has acquired the pallor of someone who spent years under fluorescent lights, and there's a manic energy in his movements that suggests someone operating under extreme psychological pressure. You observe him receiving visits from FBI profiler Bill Hagmaier, a soft-spoken investigator who has spent years building what might generously be called a professional relationship with one of America's most notorious serial killers. Hagmaier represents something new in law enforcement, a criminal investigator who has learned that understanding monsters might be more valuable than simply capturing them. Over dozens of interviews, he's gradually earned Bundy's trust by treating him as an intellectual equal rather than a specimen to be studied. The conversations you witness between Bundy and Hagmaier revealed layers of personality that previous interrogators never accessed. Away from courtroom theatrics and media attention, Bundy speaks with a clinical detachment about crimes that shocked the nation. He discusses murder techniques with the same analytical precision he once brought to studying case law, treating each killing as a problem-solving exercise that required creativity and careful execution. But there's something else happening in these final interviews, something that goes beyond simple confession or psychological analysis. You watch Bundy use his remaining time to craft a final performance, positioning himself as an expert on serial killing who can provide insights that will help law enforcement prevent future crimes. It's a masterstroke of narcissistic manipulation, transforming his impending execution into a teaching moment that keeps him at the center of attention until his final breath. The peculiar detail that emerges from these death row conversations is Bundy's insistence on maintaining certain fictions even when facing imminent execution. He continues to claim that alcohol and pornography were the primary catalysts for his crimes, offering society a comforting narrative that suggests clear causation rather than the more disturbing reality of inexplicable evil. You realize he's still trying to control the story, even from death row. During one particularly revealing conversation with Hagmaier, you watch Bundy describe his victim selection process with the detached precision of a scientist explaining experimental methodology. He speaks of hunting grounds and acquisition techniques, with language that strips all humanity from acts of predatory violence. The clinical terminology serves a dual purpose. It allows him to discuss horrific crimes without acknowledging their emotional impact, while simultaneously positioning himself as an authority on criminal behavior. You observe Bundy's relationship with the media during his final weeks, noting how he continues to grant interviews and provide statements that keep his name in headlines even as his execution date approaches. The attention feeds something essential in his psychology, the same narcissistic need for control and recognition that drove his original crimes. Even facing death, he can't resist the opportunity to perform for an audience. The confession process itself reveals the methodical intelligence that made Bundy such an effective killer for so many years. Rather than providing a complete chronological account of his crimes, he parcels out information strategically, using each revelation as leverage to delay his execution or gain some other advantage. You watch him negotiate the release of information like a businessman conducting complex transactions, treating the details of murdered women as commodities to be exchanged for favorable treatment. But gradually, as his legal options dwindle, Bundy begins providing information that helps investigators understand the true scope of his criminal career. The number of victims grows from the 30. He has been officially linked toward figures that approach 100 or more. Geographic locations expand from the Pacific Northwest in Colorado to include crimes in California, Idaho, Vermont, and other states where his presence was never previously documented. You realize you're re-witnessing something unprecedented. A serial killer with sufficient intelligence and memory to provide a comprehensive account of a multi-decade criminal career that spanned the entire continental United States. Most killers of Bundy's era operated in limited geographic areas and left minimal records of their activities. But Bundy's combination of mobility, intelligence, and methodical approach created a criminal career that reads like a masterclass in predatory behavior. Historians still debate whether Bundy's final confessions represent genuine remorse or simply another manipulation designed to extend his life. But listening to the tapes, you understand that the motivation doesn't diminish their value. Regardless of why he's talking, the information he provides helps families find closure and gives law enforcement insights that will be used to track other serial killers for decades to come. The conversations with religious advisors during his final days reveal yet another facet of Bundy's complex personality. You watch him engage with concepts of redemption and forgiveness while simultaneously continuing to minimize his responsibility for decades of violence, even when claiming to accept religious salvation. He frames his crimes in language that suggests external factors rather than personal choice drove his behavior. On January 24, 1989, you represent when Ted Bundy takes his final walk from death row to the electric chair known as Old Sparky. The scene has an almost surreal quality, dozens of protesters celebrating outside the prison walls, media trucks broadcasting live coverage of an execution, and law enforcement officials treating the event like a macabre festival rather than the solemn administration of justice. Bundy's final statement is brief and unremarkable, lacking the dramatic flourishes that characterized his courtroom performances or media interviews. He apologizes to the families of his victims, but even these final words carry the hollow ring of someone performing expected behaviors rather than expressing genuine emotion. You realize that, even facing death, Bundy remains fundamentally disconnected from the humanity of his victims or the impact of his crimes. The execution itself is swift and clinical, lasting less than 2 minutes from the moment electricity first courses through his body until medical personnel pronounce him dead. There is nothing dramatic or cinematic about the process, just the efficient administration of a legal sentence that represents society's final judgment on one of its most dangerous members. But as you watch Bundy's body being removed from the execution chamber, you understand that his death marks more than just the end of a criminal career. It represents the closing of a chapter in American criminal history that forced law enforcement to evolve new techniques for tracking predators who operate across state lines with intelligence and sophistication that challenged every existing assumption about serial killers. The most profound realization is that Ted Bundy is dead. It's that his crimes fundamentally changed how American society thinks about the monsters who hide among us. The charming stranger offering help, the educated professional who seems trustworthy, the handsome man whose smile reaches his eyes, all of these now carry a subtle undertone of suspicion that did exist before Bundy demonstrated how effectively evil can disguise itself as ordinary virtue. In the end, you realize that Ted Bundy's true legacy isn't the individual lives he destroyed, though those tragedies remain paramount. His lasting impact is the way he shattered American innocence about the nature of evil, forcing an entire society to confront the reality that the most dangerous predators lurk in dark alleys or announce their intentions with obvious warning signs. They drive Volkswagen Beetles, attend law school, and volunteer for political campaigns, hiding behind smiles that could belong to anyone's neighbor, coworker, or friend. And now, as you sit quietly in the aftermath of this story, you might find yourself looking at the world a little differently. The friendly stranger who asks for help loading groceries, the charming coworker who always knows exactly what to say, the handsome neighbor who waves from his driveway each morning. Ted Bundy's ghost whispers through all these ordinary interactions, not because danger lurks behind every smile, but because his crimes taught us that evil doesn't always announce itself with dramatic music and ominous warnings. Perhaps that's the most unsettling truth you've discovered in following this journey, that the capacity for monstrous behavior can hide behind the most reassuring facades. Bundy wasn't a wild-eyed maniac or obviously disturbed individual. He was someone who could have sat next to you in a college lecture hall, shared coffee with you at work, or helped you change a flat tire on a rainy Tuesday evening. His horror wasn't that he looked like a monster. His horror was that he looked like everyone else. But there's something else worth remembering as this story fades into the quiet hours of your evening. For every Ted Bundy who used charm as a weapon, there are millions of genuinely kind people who offer help without hidden agendas. The world didn't become more dangerous because of his crimes, it simply became more aware of dangers that always existed. So sleep peacefully tonight, knowing that understanding evil doesn't mean living in fear of it. Sometimes the greatest victory over monsters is undefeating them in dramatic confrontations. It's refusing to let their darkness eclipse the ordinary goodness that surrounds us every day. The light always returns, gentle and warm, pushing back the shadows where predators hide.